Hello and welcome to The Wire. Today we will be talking about last Sunday's flash floods in Uttarakhand, in which, as per latest information, at least 58 people have died, whose bodies or body parts have been recovered, and over 150 people still remain missing. We have scientist Ravi Chopra with us. He has warned on several occasions that a disaster such as this is waiting to happen in Uttarakhand. He is founder director of the People's Science Institute in Dehradun and has been on several committees pertaining to the Himalayas. After the 2013 Uttarakhand floods, he headed an expert panel that looked into the various reasons that caused the floods and the damage to life and property. Welcome, Dr. Chopra.
Thank you.
So to begin with, can you just explain to us a little bit from what we know so far that what happened, what caused this tragedy?
Two events took place on February 7th. A huge mass of snow, ice, water, and sediments. Sediments means rocks and huge boulders. Boulders that are about the size of a small room. They came hurtling down a very steep slope from the top of the range down to about 2000 meters and fell into river Ganga, Rishi Ganga. This created a flood. Up to this point, the event is a natural disaster. So this is one event. This kind of a flood has the potential to destroy everything that comes in its path, because these are paraglacial zones. We know that in the past, when the glaciers receded from the paraglacial valleys, they left behind massive amounts of debris, massive amounts of boulders and rocks. And that huge mass of snow, ice, and water picked up all this and came hurtling down the steep slope. And in doing that, acquired a tremendous amount of energy. When it hits the water, it transfers that energy to the water. So now that flood water begins to move downstream with tremendous energy. The first thing it hit was a bridge, and the bridge was immediately destroyed. The next barrier was the Rishi Ganga hydropower project, 13.2 megawatts, a small project. It demolished that. And each time it demolishes a barrier, the flood mass picks up more energy. As it then moves downstream, it's going to pick up more sediments, more boulders and rocks. So immediately after the barrage, it went into the Dhauli Ganga Valley, and the first barrier it encountered was the Tapovan Vishnugad barrage. Now, it hit the barrage, it destroyed the barrage, but at the same time, some of the water also entered the intake tunnel of the project. There was so much boulders and debris in that mass that it blocked the tunnel and trapped the people inside. It moved further down Dhauli Ganga until it came to the Alaknanda Valley. And then as it moved down in the Alaknanda Valley, it destroyed some more suspension bridges until the bed slope of the Alaknanda decreased enough for the flood to lose its power. Now this part is a disaster. This is where the lives are lost. Okay? This is where property, national property gets destroyed. So you have to look at it as two separate events.
So just to elaborate on that, is if you could explain these two separate things. Like you mentioned that initially what happened was a natural disaster. But
Yes.
it was a natural disaster made more likely due to man-made climate change.
Well, let's put it this way, that it was definitely triggered by a weather event. Hmm? Few days before the disaster, there had been heavy snowfall in that region. The heavy snowfall was followed by bright sunshine on the 6th. Now, when you go to the higher elevations, the solar insolation, the solar radiation is much higher than what you feel here in a valley. That began to melt the fresh snow, the ice beneath the snow, and the mass of snow, ice, and water. We've been told in past disasters, in an analysis of past disasters, that this is a deadly combination. Okay? Now, there are two theories about what happened. One is that there was this possibility of a hanging glacier that broke off and then came down the slope. Other possibility, as I just explained to you, was that there had been so much snow and ice that had dropped on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th that melted. Now, whether it is the ice break, and there is now more and more evidence accumulating that yes, there was an ice break. Okay. Now, if you want to describe that as a man-made climate change event, that's your choice.
No, I'm asking you if
I can't go that far. First of all, I did not go there to study the disaster. Okay. I have to rely on reports that are available. And as far as reports that are available, we have these two types of hypotheses, though more and more evidence is accumulating that it was probably a hanging glacier that broke off.
And also, just related to this point, do you find it worrying that we still don't know for sure that it has almost been 10 days? Why are we not monitoring these things?
Look, in the final analysis, that is not immediately critical. Immediately critical is the fact that this mass of ice, snow, and water with debris came down, and that it created a flood, and that there was a disaster later on, people died. Our attention at this time should be fixed on that. उसका कारण क्या था वो तुरंत तो आपको वैसे भी पता नहीं चलेगा. So you just wait, be patient, let the scientists complete their studies.
But the reason I'm asking also is that because if there was an early warning system of some kind, that people downstream may have been warned and they could have been able to save their lives. Is that possible or not possible?
Well, you know, what I would say is that whatever little warning could have been done, and even if 10, 15, 2, 5 lives could have been saved, that would have been a good sign. But, you know, once people knew that something is happening over there, that there is this flood coming with all the mobile phones and the mobile network, etc., there was still very little attempt to warn people downstream. After all, Rishi Ganga and Dholi Ganga, then the Tapovan Vishnu Ghat project are separated by 8 kilometers. Okay, so that could have been done. I also noticed, but I have to confirm this, I noticed that there were some men trapped on top of the barrage.
Yes, there is a video which is doing the rounds.
Right, you saw that. Now, those people were kind of helpless because there wasn't a ladder on one side of the barrage for them to come down. So, you know, these kinds of basic safety features need to be built into our projects.
These kind of safety mechanisms should be built into every project, at least in Uttarakhand?
The projects must be designed from the point of view of disaster management. There
And this is
must
not,
be escape routes.
and this is certainly not the first time you are saying this. You have mentioned this in your several reports several times. Like just so, just to go back to now, how the damage was caused. So on the one
Yeah.
hand, we have this natural disaster which perhaps was made more likely due to climate change. Then we have the damage that is caused. How are, like, a lot of people have blamed the construction of dams. There is a spotlight on dams in these regions. Why are dams a bad idea in these regions, and how do they contribute to the disaster?
Yeah, as I have said, it's even there in the expert body's report that in the region just above the main central thrust in Uttarakhand, it is a paraglacial zone.
What do you mean? What do you mean by main central thrust?
Main central thrust is a major fault uh, which becomes the site for earthquakes. It's a seismically active zone where one part of the earth slips past another part of the earth. Okay, so it is also the main thrust behind which the inner Himalayas rise. Okay, that's because of the geological movement that is taking place below the earth.
And this is at around 2000 meters.
Yeah, this is approximately, it varies because it's a southeast to northwest trending fault. It moves from the southeast to the northwest in the form of almost an arc. So at different locations, it will have a different elevation. So roughly the area above 2000 meters is a paraglacial zone. And I have explained that in the paraglacial zones, you have all these debris lying around. In the event of heavy rainfall or a flood, the rivers, however small they are able to mobilize or pick up all these sediments and debris and become a very destructive force later. Now, you take this particular case, the stream that brought the sediments down into the Rishi Ganga is probably no more than 10 or 15 kilometers long, the Ronti Gard. Okay?
Okay, so it wasn't a lot that caused the damage.
Yeah, these are small streams, but the sediments are so much, so massive, and so much material is there, and that's what adds to the potential energy of the
And why is it said that dams should not be constructed in these
because,
zones?
as I said, in these paraglacial zones, every barrier to the flood is going to be destroyed. And each time that destruction takes place, you can imagine it, there's a burst of energy. And that burst of energy is able to push the solid mass lying on the bed of the river further ahead. And therefore, the solid mass in the river continues to build up. And since these are areas with high slopes, high bed slopes, the movement acquires a lot of energy until the bed slope reduces. We saw exactly the same thing in Vishnu Prayag Dam. That's why that project was demolished.
So you're saying that whenever an event uh, such kind happens in Uttarakhand, the dams will not be able to withstand it, and they will be broken.
Yes.
So, and then they cause more damage downstream.
Yes.
So essentially, just to understand, just to be very clear, that there not so many lives would have been lost had these dams not been there.
That's true.
One,
Then
because the
flood would
workers
have
would not have been
kept
there.
rolling. It would have kept rolling down the river until the bed slope decreases and the river loses its stream power.
So there would have been a natural way that this would have flown down
Yes.
the river, and the river would have, I mean, it would have broadened, the valley would have broadened then. Like even that day, there were fears on last Sunday. There were fears downstream in Haridwar and Rishikesh that it might hit there, but it did not.
Yeah, because it was a very small event by natural standards.
So it wasn't of the magnitude that the 2013 Uttarakhand floods were.
No way. I mean, 2013 flood, you can imagine the huge area over which the amount of rainfall that fell. I mean, that was a massive event.
And how unusual is this kind of an ice fall or an avalanche kind of event in February?
That is somewhat unusual. In fact, the sudden rise in temperature on the 6th also could have been a factor. And that's where your weather effect is important. But these are things that still need to be understood with careful analysis.
But it doesn't usually happen in February.
I can't say. I'm not a weather scientist. You should interview Anand Sharma, the Deputy Director General of IMD, who's now, earlier he was in Uttarakhand. He might be able to say much more.
Who had a key role to play in the Uttara? I mean, who might have been able to help during 2013?
Yes.
So,
he issued the warnings a few days in advance. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to come back to the warnings, there are no warnings, or are there any mechanisms that can be put in place so that there are warnings of a flood of this kind?
You know, that again is a subject that I have not studied, but what I'm aware of is that disaster management steps that can be taken are missing from many development projects. That I know, that I have studied. So I can tell you कि जो हो सकता है लोगों की जान बचाने के लिए वो भी नहीं किया जाता.
And you've been coordinating with governments. You've seen how governments work. Why do you think that is that? Why is there this bias towards development activities, taking the risk, whatever the risk that may be, going against expert advice? Why is it that it always is the case that projects are not shelved if there is an environment impact, which is eminent, as scientists will always tell the government, but the government does not have a good record of listening to scientists, or does it?
You know, the unfortunate part is that the dream of development, a dream of development is sold to an unsophisticated public. Okay. Now, people who live in the mountains, they are not always happy with these projects. Now, for example, I'm hearing that people in Rainy have asked to be relocated.
And they had been protesting against these projects.
They have been protesting against them, right? But somebody sitting in Delhi who's only worried कि भाई मेरी बिजली समय पे आ जाती है, outage नहीं होता है, they're not concerned कि पहाड़ में क्या होता है, कितनी जाने जाती हैं. After all, simply to look at this event as an environmental disaster is also wrong.
Okay.
I think it's a human cost. Look at the human cost. More than 200 people, probably 250 people have died. Most of them may have been the sole breadwinners of their families. How are the families going to cope? What about their dreams? It is because we don't think of these things in human terms. And the human cost, if we were to begin to appreciate human lives, then we would take more care.
So in a sense, some dreams are more valuable than others.
Yes. The comfort of some humans more valuable.
In your in your report to the Supreme Court about the Char Dham Highway, you wrote a line which was like that we are making it a contest between us and the Himalayas. That there seems to be this contest that we are against the Himalayas. Is that what you meant? What did you mean by that? And how has that played out in this disaster?
See, the Himalayas, as you know, are the youngest major mountain range in the world. They are still evolving. The Earth is 4,500 billion years old. Himalayas are more like 40 million years old. They're extremely young in geological terms. They are still moving, shifting, trying to settle down. So we know that there are earthquakes, there are landslides. That movement is taking place all the time. Every year there are landslides. Okay. When we know this, we still think that we can do things better, that we can conquer nature. And it is in that sense that I said that it's a contest. We have made it into a contest between the Himalaya and ourselves. And I tell people often कि यार किसके खिलाफ लड़ रहे हो तुम? ये तो सोचो 2 मिनट के लिए, जाके पहाड़ के नीचे खड़े हो जाओ, अपना कद देखो और पहाड़ की ऊंचाई देखो, तब शायद समझ आ जाए कि हम ये लड़ाई जीत नहीं सकते.
But वो समझ आ रहा है? Is that happening?
भाई मैं तो ये विश्वास रखता हूँ, जो एक कवि ने एक गाना लिखा था, बदलेगा जमाना ये सितारों में लिखा है. So that is going to happen. We have to decide whether we want to be a part of the solution. If we are not a part of the solution, then Eldridge Cleaver said many years ago, if you are not a part of the solution, you are a part of the problem. So that's the only choice we have.
What could be some of the solutions here? Firstly, what should happen with dams in Uttarakhand?
Dams का जमाना जो है वो वैसे ही खत्म हो गया है. The US has been demolishing dams for the last 40 to 50 years. Okay. Today, hydropower in Uttarakhand costs us, just to produce a unit of hydropower is about 6 to 7 rupees per unit. And if you are building small dams, that cost can go up to at least 10 rupees per unit. You know very well that solar power today is being produced at as low as 2 rupees per unit, but more like 2.5 rupees a unit. Now, when you have this kind of a huge mismatch in the economics, in the price, it's only a matter of time before people shift out of these costly energy means.
But the problem there is that solar and wind are intermittent. So you would still, as part of the grid,
have your storage devices. Have your storage devices in place. Look, ultimately, there are no easy solutions. Okay, we will have problems with everything, and that's where Gandhiji comes in, when he said that the earth has enough for everyone's needs, not enough for anyone's greed. So you keep wanting more and more, you keep consumption-driven economy, तो ये सब समस्याएं होंगी.
And that is what you would say has happened in Uttarakhand in the last.
That is what is happening in all over the world. I mean, look, we are not getting economic development. What we are getting is economic growth. Growth and development are two separate things.
And what would you say, how is it that we have treated the Himalayas, or have we been able to protect the Himalayas? Have we been able to protect the people living in the Himalayas?
No.
What should be done about that? What is the government, at least, do you see that it moving in that direction?
No. Look, the report of the task force on the Himalayas in 2010, commissioned by the Planning Commission for the Planning Commission. Padi rahi. They advocated green roads. Then there is the Mission for Sustainable Himalayan Environment and Development. उसने ग्रीन रोड्स रेकमेंड किए, क्या हुआ? वो पड़ी हुई है, कोई सुनता ही नहीं है. State Action Plan for Climate Change, it recommends green roads. Do you think we are getting green roads? So, unless the mass of people wakes up and says, we don't want this kind of development. We want a development which will ensure a good life, not just for us, but also for our children and our succeeding generations. जब तक वो बात नहीं करेंगे, तब तक कुछ हिलने वाला नहीं.
There is a history of that in Uttarakhand, at least.
There was a history of that. It's forgotten.
No longer.
No longer.
And just to come back to the Himalayas, so what
we are
should
running out of time.
Just last question. What should be what would your recommendations be just for the broader Himalayas? One, why do we have to treat them different, and why do we have to be very careful about them, and what should the government, what are some of the steps that the government could take?
See, I've already said that the Himalayas are a young, evolving range, that they are prone to natural processes which lead to landslides, earthquakes, etc., destructive forces. Okay? Now, we need to, first of all, think in terms of a sustainable economic development. Okay? Sustainable growth is also possible. Just to give you one example, soon after the state was formed, it invited industry to move to Uttarakhand. Said कि हम तो power surplus राज्य बनने वाले हैं, please come. Lot of steel re-rolling mills came. In 2005, 80 steel re-rolling mills were consuming more than half the power of Uttarakhand. And yet, the mountain districts were being deprived of power. Okay. So we need to move away in a place like the Himalayan region. We need to move more and more towards the service industry. Now, tourism is very much a part of the service industry. But what kind of tourism? Uttarakhand has not hundreds but thousands of scenic locations. Okay. So the tourist traffic can be spread out to thousands of locations, not just 4 shrines. Then, if instead of building big hotels, we were to promote more and more homestays, right? Then that would spread the benefit to more and more families, right? So that is one definite path to take. And the second path is that if we make a commitment to protect our forests and our rivers and our lakes, okay, we must demand from the center a payment of ecological service. If we are giving up production of hydropower, well, you supply us some other power, particularly solar power from the national grid. If our women have stopped going into the forest to get firewood, then you supply them with a cylinder of gas at their homes. Okay? Don't make them come to the nearest kasbah, wait in a long, frustrating line for a whole day, maramari jele, and then they can't have to come back a second day for a cylinder of gas. So there are a lot of practical things we can do which are not difficult.
Moving forward, you've already said that you are hopeful. But is there anything that you particularly worry about? If there's one thing that you would be really worried about?
I worry about the growing inhumanity.
What do you mean
in our society? that there are extremely well educated, otherwise well brought up young people, old people, who simply can't feel the pain of the people who are losing their family members. That's a growing inhumanity.
Okay, on that not so hopeful note, we'll end.
You asked me that one thing that I worry about. It was your question.
But thanks for taking time out, even though you're very busy.
Okay.
Thanks for explaining everything so well. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.